The evening of November 14th started like any other Friday at the Grand Monarch Hotel in downtown Chicago. The chandeliers sparkled. The marble floors gleamed, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with fresh flowers filled the air. But for one woman, this night would change everything. Her name was Alina Reyes. She was 67 years old, and she had driven for hours just to be here tonight. Not as a guest, not as a performer, just as someone who wanted to be near the music one more time. You see, Lena had read about this event in the newspaper 3 weeks ago. A charity gala for children's hospitals. $500 a plate. Live piano music all night. The finest people in the city dressed in their finest clothes, writing checks with lots of zeros. She couldn't afford a ticket. She could barely afford the gas money to get here. But something pulled her toward this place. Something she couldn't explain. Something that had been sleeping inside her for 30 years. Alina walked through the hotel's front doors. Wearing a navy blue dress she had bought from a discount store 2 towns over. It was clean and pressed, but it wasn't designer. Her shoes were sensible flats, not heels. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun. And her only jewelry was a thin gold chain her mother had given her decades ago. She looked like someone's grandmother. Someone who had wandered into the wrong party. And that's exactly how people treated her. The lobby was already buzzing with guests. Women in red gowns and men in tailored suits laughed and clinked glasses of champagne. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd like ghosts, offering appetizers that cost more than Elena's weekly groceries. She stood near the entrance for a moment, just watching. Just remembering what it felt like to be in rooms like this. To belong in rooms like this. Then she saw it. The piano had sat in the center of the lobby like a throne. A 9-foot Steinway grand, black and beautiful, with keys that seemed to glow under the soft lights. The lid was open, and Alina could see the strings inside, waiting to be brought to life. Her heart skipped. Her fingers tingled. It had been so long since she had touched an instrument like that. So long since she had felt the weight of real ivory under her hands. She took a step toward it, without thinking. That's when she heard the commotion. A group of hotel staff had gathered near the piano, and they were all talking at once. Something was wrong. Alina moved closer, staying at the edge of the crowd, listening. The pianist had canceled, apparently, the man they had hired. Some famous musician from New York had missed his flight. Bad weather on the East Coast. No way he could make it in time. And now, 30 minutes before the gala officially started, they had no music. The event coordinator was a tall man in his 40s with slick-back hair and a perfectly pressed suit. His name tag said Richard Hayes, and right now his face was the color of a tomato. He was barking orders into his phone, calling every musician he knew. But no one was available on such short notice. Alina watched him for a moment. She watched the panic in his eyes, the sweat forming on his forehead. She knew that feeling. The feeling of everything falling apart when you needed it to go right. Before she could stop herself, she walked up to him. Richard was still on the phone when he noticed her standing there. He held up one finger, asking her to wait, then finished his call with a frustrated sigh. When he finally looked at her, his eyes moved up and down. Taking in her discount dress, and her simple shoes, and her weathered face, his expression changed. It went from stressed to annoyed in less than a second. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was polite, but barely. Alina cleared her throat. "I heard you need a pianist." Richard blinked. Then he almost laughed. "Excuse me?" "I can play," Alina said. "I know it's last minute, but I can fill in. I've played at events like this before." Now Richard did laugh. It was a short, sharp sound that made Elena's cheeks burn. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but this is a $500 plate charity gala. We have donors here who have given millions to this cause. The governor's wife is in that room. We can't just let anyone sit down at that piano." "Not just anyone," Alina said quietly. Richard's smile faded. He looked at her again, this time with something closer to pity. "Look, I'm sure you play very well at your church, or your community center, or wherever. But this is a professional event. We need a professional musician. Someone with credentials. Someone with experience." "I have experience," Alina said. Ma'am, Richard's voice was firmer now. I don't have time for this. I have a crisis to manage. Please enjoy the evening, but I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the piano area. He turned away from her. Already pulling out his phone again, Alina stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of his words. She had heard words like that before. Many times. People who looked at her and saw nothing. People who decided what she was worth based on her clothes or her age, or the color of her skin. She should have been used to it by now. But it still hurt. She was about to walk away when a young waiter approached her. He was maybe 22 or 23, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. His name tag said, Diego. Excuse me, ma'am, he said softly. Are you okay? You look upset. Alina forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just an old woman being foolish. Diego glanced toward Richard, then back at her. Were you really offering to play? Alina nodded. I was. But apparently, I don't look the part. Diego studied her for a moment. There was something in his eyes, something curious. Do you actually know how to play? Like really play? Alina looked at the piano across the room. The beautiful, silent piano that was waiting for someone to wake it up. I used to play for presidents, she said. Diego's eyebrows shot up. What? But Alina just shook her head. It was a long time ago. A lifetime ago? Before the accident? Before everything changed? She didn't explain more than that. She never did. The memories were too heavy, and she had learned that most people didn't believe her anyway. Why would they? She was just an old woman in a cheap dress. Old women in cheap dresses didn't play for presidents. Diego wanted to ask more questions. She could see it on his face. But another waiter called his name, and he had to go. Stay close, he whispered before he left. I have a feeling something's going to happen tonight. Lena watched him disappear into the crowd. Then she found a quiet corner near a potted plant and sat down on a small bench. From here, she could see the piano. She could see Richard still making frantic phone calls. She could see the guests starting to filter into the main ballroom, unaware that anything was wrong, and she could feel her fingers moving against her thigh, playing invisible notes on invisible keys, a habit she had never been able to break, even after all these years. Even after everything she had lost, the doctors had told her she would never play again. The accident had damaged the nerves in her left hand so badly that she couldn't even hold a cup of coffee for the first 2 years. The pain was constant. The frustration was worse. But Alina had never been good at listening to people who told her what she couldn't do. She had spent 30 years rebuilding what she had lost. 30 years of therapy and exercises and practice. 30 years of playing in empty rooms and nursing homes and small churches where nobody knew her name, and now she was here. In this beautiful hotel, with this beautiful piano, and a man who had looked at her like she was nothing. Alina closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't know what was going to happen next. She didn't know if she would ever touch that piano tonight. But something in her heart told her that this story wasn't over yet. The night was just beginning. And Alina Reyes had waited 30 years for a moment like this. Alina sat in her corner and watched the gala unfold. It was like watching a beautiful machine slowly break down. The guests had moved into the main ballroom now, where round tables draped in white linen filled the space. Crystal glasses sparkled under the light of 3 massive chandeliers. The centerpieces were fresh roses, deep red, probably flown in from somewhere expensive. Everything looked perfect, but something was missing. The silence in a room like this. Music was supposed to float through the air like perfume. Soft piano melodies that made people feel elegant. Background notes that filled the gaps between conversations and made strangers feel comfortable enough to open their wallets. But tonight there was no music. Just the clinking of silverware and the hollow echo of voices bouncing off the high ceilings. Alina could feel the difference. She had been to enough events like this in her younger years to know that music wasn't just decoration. It was the heartbeat of the room. Without it, everything felt flat, awkward, like a movie with no soundtrack. She watched as guests shifted in their seats. She watched as conversations started and stopped. She watched as Richard stood near the entrance, still on his phone. His face getting redder by the minute. No one was coming to save him. Alina almost felt sorry for him, almost. The host of the evening was a man named David Chen. He was in his 60s. A businessman who had made his fortune in real estate and now spent most of his time giving it away. Tonight's gala was his project. A fundraiser for children's hospitals across the Midwest. He had been planning it for months, and now it was falling apart. Alina watched him move through the room, shaking hands and smiling, but she could see the worry behind his eyes. He kept glancing toward the empty piano. He kept checking his watch. He knew something was wrong, even if his guests did, about 40 minutes into the evening. A woman in a silver dress approached the microphone on the small stage at the front of the room. She was the master of ceremonies, and her job was to keep things moving. She welcomed everyone, thanked the sponsors, and made a few jokes that got polite laughter. Then she paused. "As many of you know," she said, "we had planned to have live piano music throughout the evening. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, our pianist was unable to make it tonight." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "But don't worry," the woman continued, her smile a little too bright. "We have a wonderful playlist prepared, and the evening will continue as planned." She gestured to someone in the back, and a moment later, recorded music began to play through the speakers. Classical piano, but thin and lifeless. Like a photocopy of the real thing? Alina winced. She had nothing against recorded music. But in a room like this, with a piano like that, sitting empty and silent, it felt wrong. It felt like serving instant coffee at a 5-star restaurant. The guests tried to pretend it was fine. They went back to their conversations, their appetizers, their champagne. But the energy in the room had shifted. The magic was gone before it ever had a chance to start. Alina's fingers kept moving against her leg. She couldn't help it. Every time a song played through the speakers, her hands responded automatically, playing along on invisible keys. It was muscle memory. 30 years of practice that her body refused to forget. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her in her mind. She wasn't sitting in a corner. She was on stage. She was 23 years old again, wearing a black gown that her mother had sewn by hand. She was at Carnegie Hall, the spotlight warm on her face. 2,000 people holding their breath as her fingers danced across the keys. That night, she had played Chopin. The Ballade No. 1 in G minor. A piece so difficult that most pianists spent years just learning to play it correctly. But Alina hadn't just played it correctly. She had made it breathe. She had made it weep. She had made grown men cry and children sit perfectly still. The standing ovation had lasted for minutes. Her mother had been in the front row, tears streaming down her face. Her father, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her lessons, had stood with his hand over his heart like he was watching a miracle. That was the night. Alina Reyes became a name that people remembered, and then, 8 years later, it all went away. The accident happened on a rainy night in April. Alina was driving home from a concert in Philadelphia. She was tired. She should have stopped at a hotel, but she wanted to sleep in her own bed. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. He crossed into her lane at 60 miles per hour. Alina survived. Barely her left hand was crushed between the steering wheel and the dashboard. The doctors saved it, but they couldn't save what it used to do. The nerves were damaged beyond repair. The fingers that had once moved like water now felt like stone. She spent 6 months in the hospital. Another year in physical therapy, and every single doctor told her the same thing. You'll never play again. For a while, Alina believed them. For a while, she stopped trying. She put the piano covers on and didn't take them off. She stopped listening to music because it hurt too much. She let that part of herself die. But something happened on her 40th birthday. She was alone in her apartment, eating leftover cake when a commercial came on television. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, was sitting at a tiny keyboard, plunking out a simple melody with one finger. The girl looked at the camera and smiled. "I'm going to be a famous piano player someday," she said. Alina started crying and couldn't stop. The next morning, she took the covers off her piano. It took her 5 years to play a single scale without pain. It took her 10 years to play a simple song from beginning to end. It took her 20 years to get back to where she had been before the accident, but she did it. She played in nursing homes, where the residents didn't know who she was. She played in small churches where the congregation thought she was just a volunteer. She played in empty auditoriums at midnight, when no one was watching. It's just to prove to herself that she still could. And now she was here. 67 years old? Sitting in a corner at a charity gala where no one knew her name. Watching a beautiful piano, gathered dust while recorded music played through cheap speakers. It was almost funny, almost. Alina opened her eyes and looked at the piano again. It was still there, still waiting. The lid was still open. The keys were still gleaming. She wondered what it would feel like to touch them, to press down and hear that first note ring out, real and alive, to feel the vibration travel up through her fingers and into her heart. She wondered if she still had it. The magic. The thing that used to make people stop breathing when she played. Or maybe that was gone forever. Maybe the accident had taken more than just her hand. Maybe it had taken the spark too, and she was just too stubborn to admit it. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're still here." Lena looked up. It was Diego, the young waiter from earlier. He was carrying an empty tray and smiling like he had just discovered a secret. "I told you I had a feeling," he said. Alina smiled back. "I don't have anywhere else to be." Diego glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then sat down on the bench next to her. "Okay, you have to tell me," he said. "What did you mean earlier? When you said you used to play for presidents?" Alina was quiet for a moment. She had kept this story to herself for so long. It was easier that way. Easier to be invisible. Easier to let people think she was nobody. But something about Diego's eyes made her want to tell the truth. "I played at the White House 3 times, she said. "Once for President Carter, twice for President Reagan. I performed at Carnegie Hall when I was 23. I toured Europe for 5 years. I recorded 6 albums. I was on the cover of magazines you've probably never heard of." Diego's mouth fell open. "Are you serious?" "I was somebody once," Alina said. "A long time ago? Before people stopped seeing me." Diego stared at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then he looked at the piano across the room, then back at her. "Why don't you just go up there and play?" he asked. "Just sit down and show them who you are." Alina shook her head. "It's not that simple. I wasn't invited. I don't belong here. And besides, your boss made it very clear that I'm not what they're looking for." "My boss is an idiot," Diego said. Alina laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep. "Maybe so," she said. "But he's in charge. And I'm just an old woman in a cheap dress." Diego was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be thinking about something, making a decision. "What if someone invited you?" he asked. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, another waiter called his name from across the room. Diego stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his tray. "Don't leave," he said. "Promise me you won't leave." Lena looked at him. At this young man she had just met, who was looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth something. "I promise," she said. Diego nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd. Alina watched him go. She didn't know what he was planning. She didn't know if it would change anything. But for the first time in 30 years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Alina waited. She watched Diego weave through the crowd, his white jacket disappearing between tables of wealthy guests. She lost sight of him near the stage, then spotted him again by the kitchen doors. Then he was gone. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The recorded music kept playing. Beethoven, Mozart, Debussy, beautiful pieces reduced to background noise, competing with the sound of forks scraping plates and ice cubes clinking in glasses. Alina started to wonder if Diego had forgotten about her. Maybe he got busy. Maybe his manager yelled at him for sitting down on the job. Maybe the whole thing was just a nice moment with a kind stranger. And that was all it was meant to be. She had been let down before. She knew how to handle disappointment. But just as she was about to stand up and leave, she saw something that made her heart stop. Diego was walking across the ballroom. And he wasn't alone. Next to him, was David Chen, the host of the gala. The man whose name was on every banner and every program. The man who had spent months planning this night, and they were walking straight toward her. Elena's mouth went dry. She gripped the edge of the bench and tried to remember how to breathe. David Chen was shorter than she expected. Maybe 5'7", with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple, black suit. No flashy watch or rings. He looked like someone's favorite uncle, not a millionaire. He stopped in front of her bench and smiled. "Good evening," he said. His voice was warm. "I understand you're a pianist." Elena looked at Diego, who was standing behind David with the biggest grin she had ever seen. The young man gave her a small nod, like he was saying, "Go ahead, tell him." "I am," Elena said. "Or I was." "It's complicated." David tilted his head. "Diego here tells me you've played at the White House. Is that true?" Elena hesitated. This was the moment where people usually laughed. The moment where they looked at her clothes and her age and decided she was lying or confused or just a lonely old woman making up stories. But David wasn't laughing. He was waiting, listening. "Yes," Elena said. 3 times. President Carter in 1979. President Reagan in 83 and 85. David's eyebrows lifted. "That's quite a resume." "What else?" Elena took a breath. "Carnegie Hall. I made my debut there when I was 23. I toured with the Chicago Symphony for 2 years. I played in Vienna, Berlin, Paris, London. I recorded 6 albums with Deutsche Grammophon. I was nominated for a Grammy in 1981. The words came out easier than she expected, like she had been waiting 30 years to say them out loud. David was quiet for a moment. He studied her face, her hands, her eyes, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, like he was trying to see the young woman she used to be underneath the gray hair and wrinkles. "What happened?" he asked gently. Elena looked down at her left hand. The scars were faded now, almost invisible, but she could still feel them. "Car accident," she said. 1987. A truck crossed into my lane. One spent a year in the hospital. The doctor said I would never play again." "But you did play again," David said. "It wasn't a question," Elena nodded. "It took me 30 years. But yes, I play again." David was silent for a long moment. Around them, the gala continued. Guests laughed and talked and pretended not to notice that the evening felt empty without real music. The recorded piano played on, lifeless and thin. Finally, David spoke. "Would you like to play tonight?" Elena's heart nearly burst out of her chest. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. Someone finally seeing her. Someone finally giving her a chance. But now that it was happening, she was terrified. "I don't know if I should," she said. "Your coordinator, Richard, he made it clear that I'm not what you're looking for. I don't want to cause any problems." David glanced across the room to where Richard was still pacing near the entrance, phone glued to his ear. Then he looked back at Elena with a small smile. "Richard is very good at logistics," David said. "He's not as good at seeing people. I, on the other hand, have spent 50 years in business. You learn to read people quickly. And right now, I'm looking at someone who knows exactly what she's doing." He held out his hand. "Please," he said, "play for us." Elena looked at his hand, then at the piano across the room, then at Diego, who looked like he might explode from excitement. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The accident, the pain, the years of rebuilding, the nursing homes and empty churches and midnight sessions when nobody was watching. All of it, every single moment, had been leading here. She took David's hand and stood up. "Okay," she said. "I'll play." David smiled. "Follow me." They walked across the ballroom together. Elena kept her eyes on the piano, afraid that if she looked away, it might disappear. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. But she kept walking. The guests barely noticed them at first. They were too busy with their conversations and their wine and their expensive appetizers. But a few people glanced up as Elena passed. A few people frowned. wondering who this old woman was and why she was walking with David Chen. Then they reached the piano. Alina stopped and stared at it. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The black lacquer finish was perfect, without a single scratch. The keys were real ivory, slightly yellowed with age, the way she liked them. The bench was padded with red velvet. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. Richard noticed them from across the room. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He started walking toward them, his mouth already open to protest. "Mr. Chen," he said, his voice tight. "Sir, what's going on?" "Who is this woman?" David raised his hand calmly. "Richard, I'd like you to meet Alina Reyes. She's going to be our pianist for the evening." Richard looked like someone had just slapped him. "Sir, with all respect, this is highly irregular. We can't just let anyone sit down and play. We have a reputation to maintain. The donors expect a certain level of Richard." David's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "I've made my decision. Please ask the sound technician to turn off the recorded music." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. "But sir, now please." Richard stared at Alina with something between confusion and anger. She met his eyes without flinching. She had faced down concert halls full of critics. She could handle one nervous event coordinator. Finally, Richard turned and walked away. A moment later, the recorded music stopped. The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Everyone in the room looked toward the piano, wondering what was happening. Alina felt 500 pairs of eyes land on her at once. For a moment, she couldn't move. The fear was overwhelming. What if she had forgotten how to play? What if her hands failed her? What if she sat down and nothing came out? What if the doctors had been right all along? Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was David. "Take your time," he said quietly. "We're not going anywhere." Alina closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She let it out slowly. Then she walked to the piano bench and sat down. The velvet was soft beneath her. The keys stretched out in front of her like an old friend. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, feeling the weight of them. The left hand that had been crushed and rebuilt. The right hand that had never stopped believing. She thought about her mother, who had saved pennies for years to buy her first keyboard. She thought about her father, who had worked himself to exhaustion so she could take lessons. She thought about every teacher who had believed in her, every audience that had given her a standing ovation, every note she had ever played, and she thought about all the people who had told her no. The doctors, the critics, the strangers who looked at her and saw nothing. Tonight, she would show them all. Alina raised her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. The room held its breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out like a bell in the silence. It was a single note. Just one. But it filled the entire room. It bounced off the chandeliers and the marble floors and the high ceilings. It wrapped around every person in that ballroom like a warm blanket on a cold night, and then came the second note, and the third. And suddenly, Alina wasn't just playing a piano anymore. She was telling a story. She had chosen Chopin, the Ballade No. 1 in G minor, the same piece she had played at Carnegie Hall 44 years ago, the piece that had made her famous, the piece that had broken her heart and put it back together more times than she could count. It starts slow, gentle, like a whisper. Like someone trying to tell you a secret they've kept for a very long time. Elena's fingers moved across.
Yes.
The keys like water flowing over stones. There was no hesitation, no fear. The moment she touched the ivory, something inside her unlocked. Something that had been sleeping for 30 years. The guests stopped talking at first. It was just the tables closest to the piano. People put down their forks. They set down their glasses. They turned in their seats to see who was making this sound. Then the silence spread, table by table, row by row, until the entire ballroom was still. 500 people, frozen in place, watching an old woman in a cheap dress do something impossible. Alina didn't notice. She was somewhere else now, Somewhere deep inside the music, where nothing else existed, her eyes were closed. Her body swayed gently with the melody. Her fingers danced and leaped and flew. The piece grew louder, more urgent. The gentle whisper became a conversation, then an argument, then a storm. The notes crashed against each other like waves against rocks. The melody soared and fell and soared again, and Alina played it all from memory. Every note, every pause, every tiny detail that she had learned when she was 18 years old and practiced until her fingers bled in the audience. Things were happening. A woman in a red dress put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wet. She didn't know why she was crying. She just knew that she couldn't stop. A man in his 70s, a retired judge who hadn't cried since his wife's funeral, felt something break open inside his chest. He thought about his daughter, who he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. He thought about all the things he should have said and never did. A young couple near the back, who had been arguing quietly all evening about something stupid that neither of them could remember now, reached across the table and held hands. The music was doing something to people. It was reaching inside them and finding the places they kept hidden. The regrets, the hopes, the love they were afraid to show, the pain they were afraid to feel, and it was setting all of it free. Diego stood near the kitchen doors, his empty tray forgotten in his hands. His eyes were fixed on Alina. He had believed her when she told him who she was. But believing and seeing were two different things. This was something he would remember for the rest of his life. Richard stood at the edge of the room, his phone hanging loose in his hand. His face had gone through several colors in the past few minutes, red with embarrassment, white with shock, and now something softer, something almost like shame. He had looked at this woman and seen nothing. He had laughed at her. He had sent her away like she was nobody, and now she was making the entire room weep. David Chen stood near the stage, his arms crossed, a small smile on his face. He had taken a chance on a stranger. He had trusted his gut instead of his coordinator. And now he was watching something extraordinary happen. This was why he did what he did. This was why he threw Gallus and wrote checks and spent his time trying to make the world a little better. Because sometimes, if you were lucky, you got to witness a miracle. The music reached its climax. Elena's hands were a blur now. The notes came so fast, so furious, that it seemed impossible for one person to be making all of them. The piano sang and roared and screamed. The sound filled every corner of the room, every empty space, every broken heart. And then, suddenly it began to slow. The storm passed. The waves calmed. The fury melted into something gentle, something sad, something beautiful beyond words. Alina played the final passage with her eyes still closed. Tears were streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. She let herself feel everything she had been holding inside for 30 years. The pain of the accident. The despair of being told she would never play again. The loneliness of rebuilding herself in silence, with no one watching, no one believing. The fear that she had lost herself forever, and the joy. The indescribable joy of sitting at a piano again, in front of people who were actually listening and proving that she was still here, that she had survived, that they hadn't broken her. The last note faded into silence. Elena's hands rested on the keys. She didn't move. She didn't open her eyes. She just sat there, breathing, feeling the echo of the music still vibrating in her bones. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was completely silent. 500 people, not one of them making a sound. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Nothing. Alina felt a flash of fear. Had she failed? Had they hated it? Had she imagined the whole thing? And then the applause began. It started with one person. David Chen, standing near the stage, bringing his hands together slowly. Then another person joined in. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The applause was like thunder. It rolled through the ballroom in waves. People were cheering. People were wiping tears from their eyes. People were looking at each other in disbelief, asking, "Did that just happen? Did we just witness that?" Alina finally opened her eyes. She turned on the bench and saw 500 people standing. 500 people clapping. 500 people looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. She saw Diego near the kitchen, jumping up and down like a kid at a birthday party. She saw David Chen nodding at her with respect. She saw the woman in the red dress still crying, still clapping, still unable to look away. And she saw Richard. He was standing at the edge of the room, not moving. His hands were at his sides. His face was pale. He looked like a man who had just realized he had made a terrible mistake. Their eyes met across the room. Alina didn't feel anger. She didn't feel satisfaction. She just felt tired. Tired and grateful and alive. She gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement, recognition, a silent message that said, "I see you. I know what you did, and I'm still here." Richard looked away first. The applause went on and on. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3. People didn't want to stop. They didn't want the moment to end. Finally, David Chen walked to the piano and raised his hands. The crowd slowly quieted, though a few people were still wiping their eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "I think we can all agree that we just witnessed something extraordinary." Another wave of applause. More cheers. David turned to Alina and smiled. "Would you like to play another piece?" he asked. Alina looked at the piano, at the keys that had given her back her life, at the instrument that had been her first love, her greatest loss, and now her resurrection. She smiled back at him. "I thought you'd never ask," she said. And as she turned back to the piano and placed her fingers on the keys once more, Alina Reyes knew that this night was just the beginning. She had been invisible. For 30 years, but not anymore. Never. Again, Alina played for 2 more hours that night. She played Beethoven. And Debussy and Rachmaninoff. She played songs she had learned as a child and songs she had written herself. She played fast and slow, loud and soft, happy and sad. And with every piece, the audience fell deeper in love. People stopped eating. They stopped drinking. They pushed back their chairs and gathered around the piano, standing 3 rows deep, just to be closer to the music. Some of them recorded videos on their phones. Some of them just closed their eyes and listened. Nobody wanted it to end, but eventually it had to. Around 10:30, Alina played her final piece. It was something she had composed herself years ago during the darkest time of her recovery. She called it "Still Here." It was a simple melody, quiet and hopeful. Like the first rays of sunlight after a long night, when the last note faded. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. The applause came again. Louder this time, if that was even possible. People were cheering her name, even though most of them didn't know what it was. They just knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. Alina stood up slowly. Her back ached. Her fingers were sore. She had played longer tonight than she had played in 30 years combined, but she had never felt more alive. David Chen was the first to reach her. He took her hand in both of his and shook it warmly. "That was the most incredible thing I have ever seen," he said. "And I've seen a lot of incredible things," Alina smiled. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for showing up," David said. "Sometimes the universe puts exactly the right person in exactly the right place. Tonight, that person was you." Before Alina could respond, she was surrounded by guests. They crowded around her, shaking her hand, hugging her, thanking her. A woman in a silver dress told her that her late husband had loved Chopin, and hearing Alina play had made her feel close to him again. A man in his 60s said he was going to call his estranged brother tomorrow because life was too short. A teenage girl, there with her parents, asked if Alina could teach her to play someday. Alina listened to all of them. She held their hands and looked into their eyes and thanked them for listening. This was why she had spent 30 years rebuilding herself. Not for the applause, not for the recognition, but for moments like these, moments when music brought people together and healed something broken inside them. Then came a voice from behind her. "Excuse me," Alina turned. It was Richard. He looked different now. Smaller, somehow. The arrogance was gone from his face. In its place was something that looked a lot like shame. "Owe you an apology," he said quietly. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching. "I judged you by how you looked. I assumed you were nobody because you didn't fit my idea of what somebody should look like. That was wrong. That was incredibly wrong. And I am truly sorry." Alina studied his face for a long moment. She thought about all the times in her life when people had looked at her and seen nothing. All the doors that had been closed in her face, all the chances she had never been given. She could have been angry. She had every right to be. But anger was heavy, and she had carried enough weight for one lifetime. "I forgive you," she said simply. "Just promise me something. Anything. The next time someone shows up at your door and they don't look the way you expect them to look, give them a chance anyway. You never know who they might be." Richard nodded slowly. His eyes were wet. "I promise." He held out his hand and Alina shook it. Around them, a few people clapped. It was a small sound, but it meant everything. Because this moment wasn't just about Alina and Richard. It was about all the times we'd look at strangers and decide who they are before we give them a chance to show us. The crowd eventually began to thin. Guests said their goodbyes and headed for the doors, many of them still buzzing about what they had witnessed. But before Alina could slip away quietly, David Chen appeared at her side again. "Alina," he said, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked at him curiously. David pulled out his phone. "After your first piece, I did something I probably should have done before. I looked you up." Elena's heart skipped. "Elena Reyes Munoz," David said, reading from his screen. Child prodigy from San Antonio, Texas. Made her debut at Carnegie Hall at age 20. Performed at the White House for 3 different presidents. Toured with some of the greatest orchestras in the world. 6 studio albums. 1 Grammy nomination. Called the most gifted pianist of her generation by the New York Times. He looked up from his phone, then he disappeared, he said. "The last article I could find was from 1988. It mentioned a car accident. Severe injuries. And then nothing. It was like you vanished from the face of the earth." Lena was quiet for a moment. "I didn't vanish," she said. "I just became invisible. There's a difference." David nodded slowly. "I understand that now." He paused. "But I think the world deserves to know that you're still here. Would you be willing to do an interview? Tell your story? I know some people in media who would love to hear it." Alina thought about it. For 30 years, she had lived in silence. She had played in empty rooms and small churches and nursing homes where nobody knew her name. It had been peaceful, in its own way, safe, but it had also been lonely. Maybe it was time to come back. "Let me think about it," she said. David smiled. "Take all the time you need." Before Alina left that night, one more thing happened. The event coordinator came to find David with the final numbers. The donations. The total amount raised for children's hospitals across the Midwest. David looked at the paper and his eyes went wide. "This can't be right," he said. "I triple-checked it, sir," the coordinator said. "It's right." David turned to Alina with a stunned expression. "We set a goal of $2 million for tonight," he said. "We've raised $4.7 million. It's the most we've ever raised at any event, ever." Alina felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's wonderful," she said. "It's because of you," David said. "People were so moved by your performance that they kept giving. One donor wrote a check for $500,000. He said your music reminded him why he started his foundation in the first place." Lena didn't know what to say. She had come here tonight hoping for one small moment at the piano. She never imagined anything like this. David took her hand one more time. "You didn't just play music tonight, Alina. You changed lives. You reminded people what it feels like to be human. That's a rare gift. Don't ever let anyone make you feel invisible again." Alina squeezed his hand. "I won't," she said. "I promise." She walked out of the Grand Monarch Hotel just before midnight. The air was cold and crisp, and the streets were quiet. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the stars. 30 years ago, she had lost everything. Her career, her identity, her belief in herself. She had been told she would never play again, and for a long time she had believed it. But she had never given up. She had fought her way back, one note at a time, one day at a time. And tonight, she had finally proven what she had known all along. She was still here. She was still Alina Reyes, and her music still had the power to bring a room to its knees. As she walked to her car, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Diego running toward her, still in his waiter's uniform. "Wait," he called out. "You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you?" Alina laughed. "I didn't want to bother you. You must be exhausted." Diego stopped in front of her, catching his breath. "Are you kidding? That was the best night of my life. I gotta see history happen. I gotta be part of it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. "My grandmother loves piano music," he said. "She's in a nursing home on the south side. She doesn't have many visitors. If you ever have time, maybe you could." He trailed off, suddenly embarrassed. Alina took the paper and looked at the address. Then she looked at Diego, this young man who had believed in her when no one else would. "I'll be there next Tuesday," she said. "Tell her to save me a seat." Diego's face lit up like the sun. Alina climbed into her car and started the engine. As she pulled away from the hotel, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw the lights of the Grand Monarch fading behind her. She had come here tonight as a nobody, an old woman in a cheap dress, someone who didn't belong, and she was leaving as herself, for the first time in 30 years. Alina Reyes was going home, and she was going home happy.